So here we are at the 5-year anniversary of Brexit, almost. I think it's this weekend, this Friday or Saturday, it's officially 5 years. But at this point, we've actually only had 6 months of Brexit. And already, the Leavers are not happy about Brexit. And I can't even remember the number of times in the past we've gone and done videos about how Brexit would never ever be able to satisfy the Leavers, because the thing is, as we've always said, you've got to separate these groups of people into two. There were the Brexiteers, so that's Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove. Those were the Brexiteers, and when I've always said that, that's who I'm referring to. Then you've got the Brexit supporters, and those Brexit supporters are just the people who voted for Brexit. They're like me, except they voted for Brexit. That's who they are. So always remember that when I'm saying Brexiteer, I'm referring to like Boris Johnson, etc. Brexit supporters, completely different kettle of fish. So it was not a surprise at all to see that there has been a serious worm turning against what people wanted. Because if you look at any of the conversations, be they in written form or in video, you will see with an absolute certainty people who voted for Leave generally voted because they were assured by the Brexiteers that somehow voting to Leave would make their lives better. And as we've said before, the problems that this country faced were never caused by the EU. It's laughable to even think that they were. They were caused by a UK government, a conservative government, this very government who was engaged in austerity that actively has damaged this country significantly worse than it used to be. And the idea that austerity is gone, that Boris Johnson has washed it away, is completely false, because Rishi Sunak in his last budget has continuously said he intends to there be an 8% budget cut across the board, all departments. So we know that's happening. We know austerity is going to be back with a vengeance. And to a lot of people who voted for Leave, because again they wanted it to make their lives somehow be better, again, it was so nebulous, and Leave ran a campaign to promise everything to everyone. That cannot stand. That very coalition cannot stand, because sooner or later you actually have to start delivering on your promises. And here's the thing. Leavers are potentially looking at getting very impatient about the promises that Brexit was set out to do. And they have not been delivered on, and they pretty much will not be delivered upon. So, as always, before we do jump into the article, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page. And of course, there is the one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you to all those people who do support me and the channel that way. So, on with the article. This comes from The Guardian. The title is, Leavers Had High Hopes for Brexit, and they have not been delivered. Doesn't time fly? 5 years ago, we were going to the ballot box to cast our votes in the EU referendum. Now we are approaching 18 months since the UK ceased to be a member state. The transition period ended 6 months ago, yet, as the latest Ipsos Mori survey indicates, most of the British public still think Brexit isn't over. Overall, more than 2 in 5 think there are still many important issues to finalise and lots more negotiations to come. And with a further one saying that 1 in 4 saying that there are still some important areas left to actually decide upon. Even among Leave voters, only 1 in 5 think the future relationship, mostly decided, will actually hardly change. And they have a point. The full implications of decisions to leave the European Union have actually yet to be felt. Much does still remain to be resolved, including the Northern Ireland Protocol. But the implications of Brexit go far beyond the UK-EU relations, partly, of course, it is still playing its way through our politics. The Hartlepool and the Chesham and Amersham by-elections illustrate the enduring impact of the divide the referendum revealed in our society. Brexit was sold partly as an uprising against the entrenched elite, although leaving the EU was also portrayed as an opportunity for Britain to do things differently, whether it be on trade deals or domestic regulation. And I want to point that out, actually, because that is true, that it was sold as an uprising against the elite, but what we essentially got was a revolution from the top down. Essentially, you changed David Cameron for Boris Johnson, and while on the appearance, revolution complete, no, things were just continuing on as normal. The status quo was not changed. It has just become even more entrenched. But anyway, here we go. So we are already starting to see that there is a sense that those new powers may also bring very unpopular choices, as seen with the trade deal with Australia. So should we, for example, sacrifice small farm holdings for just the sake of a 0.2% of GDP? What then for gross domestic regulation? Freedom from Brussels bureaucracy was the ultimate objective for most of the early Tory Eurosceptics. But those quote B words who made John Major's life miserable and who opposed the EU for decades, with Brexit done, however, there is still far less talk of the ambiguous regulatory reform. One reason is the nature of the new Conservative coalitions, combining those traditional Tory voters who might want to roll back the state and reduce regulation with the new Northern supporters who very well may not. The coincidence of lockdown and travel restrictions with the early impact of Brexit has meant that few people have felt a direct impact of leaving the EU, for good or ill. Half of the public overall say that Brexit has made no difference in their daily life, raising to more than 7 in 10 Leave voters, and 3/4 of Leave voters do not know anyone affected positively or even negatively. Yet, while all this may come as some sort of a reassurance to the government, the figures also point at a huge potential for grounds of concern. One thing, many Remain voters say that they have felt an impact. More than 40% claim to know people whose jobs and businesses have been effective, perhaps reflecting the different types of employment and networks. And more than half think that Brexit has made their daily life worse. We cannot know for sure why voters of Chesham and Amersham swung so decisively behind the Liberal Democrats, for whatever the result might be replicated in a general election. But the government is surely alert to the potential threat posed by disgruntled Conservative Remain voters who no longer have to wrestle with their fear of putting Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street. Perhaps more importantly, the argument that Brexit has been relatively painless might not resonate well with Leave voters for long. With focus groups that were conducted with comfortable Leavers underlying this group's very high expectations, many expect the departure from the EU to be a change trigger that prompt the government to address issues ranging from infrastructure, health and policing to overall rejuvenating British manufacturing. And such aspirations were not limited to this particular group of Leavers. Deborah Maddison refers in her book on the so-called Red Wall to the giddy optimism of many Leave voters about the post-Brexit landscape. 5 years on then, and there is still no clear idea that the government can or even knows what to do to deliver to those voters who backed Brexit, and the competing visions for those who did so to make this task still more difficult. Certainly for some, the very fact of having left is just enough. But the UK is no longer, for the most part, bound by rules that it did not set itself. Yet there is still the substances for many voters to, quote, control was not an end and in itself, but a means to a more substantive objectives. For now, it seems that the impacts are not being widely felt by the British public. The wider crisis of the last 18 months and tens of thousands of deaths and an ever-growing health crisis, chaos in the school systems, cancelled holidays and lockdowns may have changed what people think is possible. But the Conservative majority is built on high expectations and for positive change and has so far as we look to finally emerge from this pandemic over the next 12 months, it actually remains to be seen whether the government is able to convince its supporters that Brexit has been delivered. And that is generally the truth about that. You know, as it was said in that book, you know, the giddy optimism. We've said before, we have handed, under Theresa May, there was a hard right coup that effectively put Boris Johnson in and put even more hard right people in. We've seen the competing ideas of global Britain versus levelling up. The mention there of rejuvenating British manufacturing heavily realises in that levelling up campaign. But as we've said before, the more that the Conservatives lean to one or the other of those two big ideas, the more it undermines the other. And it is very clear that this government is very objectively clinging on to the idea of global Britain. It cannot support the idea of rejuvenating British manufacturing if they're going to cling so hard to that global Britain agenda, because the more they cling to it, the more it undermines the levelling up agenda. You cannot have this global Britain agenda while not protecting and helping to build UK manufacturing. That requires a level of protectionism and regulations that should help them. They will claim that the free ports are the way that will help, but those free ports, you look at any study done about free ports, and what tends to happen when you put a free port in an area, all that happens is that those companies that were outside that free port area just move to that free port area for the tax breaks. So it's not so much adding new jobs, is that it moves jobs into that free port area, and the government then loses tax revenue. That's just one of the many things of why free ports are a bad idea. And like I say, we've tried free ports before and they failed. So the big question will come, and it will come, how long before many of these Leave voters start to really realise that the change that they that they voted for and were told by the Brexiteers that they would be getting if they voted for Brexit, realise that they're not getting the change that they wanted. What happens then? So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to those people who support me, and we'll see you all next time.